It's titled The Great Replacement, 87 pages, more than 16,000 words. Not rambling, but a spell-checked reference dissertation on a hate-filled view of immigrants, immigration, and Muslims. Unsigned, it is the killer's explanation for why he did this.
These are people who I would describe as having extremist views that have absolutely no place in New Zealand and, in fact, have no place in the world.
There is no doubt the 28-year-old under arrest is a white supremacist who believes his own white European race is being wiped out by immigration, labeling it white genocide. It is also the universal rallying cry of hate-filled white supremacists across the world. In Charlottesville, Virginia, the neo-Nazi cry was, in Warsaw, Poland in 2017, some marchers in an Independence Day demonstration carried banners that read White Europe and Clean Blood. 2015 in Charleston, South Carolina, a white teenager named Dylan Roof murdered 9 African Americans in a church. The white supremacist reportedly said, "Y'all are raping our white women. Y'all are taking over the world," as he gunned down unarmed parishioners. The rhetoric is old, but new technology has allowed these messages of hate to be spread in real time across the globe. The New Zealand killer streamed parts of his attack live on Facebook. The video spread to YouTube, Twitter, news sites before police pleaded for it to stop.
I have seen social media footage. It's very disturbing. It shouldn't be in the public domain, and we're doing everything we can to remove it.
But hours after the attack, copies of the gruesome video still continued to appear, shared by social media users. While police will not discuss motive, the suspect refers to Dylan Roof and writes he was inspired by white supremacist Anders Breivik, who killed 77 people in Norway 8 years ago. He does try to explain his own breaking point came in 2017. The French presidential election of what he describes as an anti-white ex-banker, and the terror-related death of an 11-year-old Swedish girl run down by a Muslim terrorist in a stolen truck in Stockholm, a crime, he writes, he could no longer ignore. And Jake, in his 87 pages, the suspect does make one reference to Donald Trump. Are you a supporter, he asks himself. As a symbol of renewed white identity and common purpose, he says, sure. As a policymaker and leader, dear God, no. Jake?
Drew Griffin, thank you so much. Let's bring in our experts. Let me start with you, Phil Mudd. New Zealand, as we've talked about, is part of the Five Eyes network of intelligence sharing, the United States, Canada, UK, Australia, New Zealand. They're all actively sharing intelligence. Bill Kristol asked earlier whether or not intelligence about this kind of threat, white supremacists, white nationalists, is shared as much as the threats of Islamist terrorists or would-be terrorists. Is it?
I'd say yeah, but let me give you an asterisk. Look, don't think of this as white or Islamist or black or whatever. Think of this as people who pose a threat, in this case in New Zealand. If you saw that same threat, if you're in the New Zealand service and see a threat, whether it's from ISIS or whether it's somebody like this, and that threat is against New York City, if there's a risk of death in New York City, I don't care where it comes from, a security service is going to pass that. Now, there is an asterisk here. If you look, for example, the National Counterterrorism Center, if you look at our national apparatus here in the United States, after 9/11, that is largely focused on, obviously, Islamic extremism. So I would say the information might be passed. The architecture to pick up the intelligence on people like this, I don't think is as advanced as it would be against an ISIS sympathizer.
Even though there are more attacks in the United States by white nationalists, white supremacists, than by any other group. Bobby Ghosh, the suspect, said he wanted to incite violence, retaliation, and further divide. According to the New York Times, the killer had the names of military leaders who primarily battled non-white forces on his guns. He praised killers who carried out attacks on Jews and Muslims. Tell us what all this means to you.
Well, this is all very, very familiar. He put out in 80 or 90 pages what Anders Breivik put out in 1,500 pages, the Norwegian mass murderer from 7 or 8 years ago. So we've heard this sort of rationalization before. We've heard these stories before. He's citing historical wrongs, what he perceives to be historical wrongs. He's citing the need for purity, This is very familiar. This sounds exactly like the sort of thing that we hear from ISIS terrorists or Al-Qaeda terrorists. This obsession with ancient historical events, ancient historical characters, usually distorted in their view, far from the reality, plus a desire for some sort of a reclamation of purity in the modern world. This is classic terrorist behavior, and law enforcement agencies ought to be able to do a better job of spotting this, because they are already doing this for one kind of terror group. They ought to be able to do that more broadly for others.
Farah, you worked on countering violent extremism for both the George W. Bush and Barack Obama administrations. You have a new book out titled How We Win, and have extensively researched this issue of extremism. Our Clarissa Ward notes that the alleged shooter's writings, as Bobby just noted, bear striking similarity to what we typically see from ISIS terrorists. Are you surprised at the similarity?
No, I'm not surprised. I mean, look, we're looking at a measurement stick around securing communities based on a physical dimension. So we are defeating ISIS, and I say that in quotes, based on the physical territory. What Phil just said is really important. What's happening in the ideological space, and how are we measuring that? What's happening emotionally? This guy in his manifesto is talking about what he saw when he went to France. He's talking about what the emotional capacity was when he was absorbing all of these things. So it isn't just what is happening in the online space. It's how you're living your life day to day. Government has not been culturally listening to the rise of hate, of all kinds of hate. Globally, we have one-offs in Charlottesville, we have one-offs now in New Zealand, and we think this is about a church or a synagogue or a mosque. It's not. It's about the way hate has been allowed to manifest itself all around the world, and how the issue of identity and belonging is the spark that allows these guys to thrive. So that's where we need to be looking, and that's where the solutions actually lie, Jake, because it's within communities. It's what we have to do. We have been very lazy on hate in the years since 9/11, and we've allowed all of these kinds of hates to grow.
And Hima, let me bring you in. This massacre was live streamed on Facebook. It was announced on 8chan. It was reposted on YouTube. It was commented on Reddit. It was sent around the world before the tech companies took it down. How is it possible, given the technology at their disposal today, that it took so long for the internet companies to stop this video from being shown?
Well, I think, Jake, there's a lot of things that are happening here, but one of the things that we have to focus on is that the online companies have chosen to do what's called notice and takedown. If you tell me something is a problem, then I will do something about it. And instead of doing things that could be done here. So, for example, let's put us in the physical setting. When there's a horrible situation happening, a lot of times people go running to see what it is, and then they call 911. In the online space, the conduct is no different. In fact, Facebook even says by their own words that a live stream video will get 6 times the interaction of a non-live stream video. So they're pushing that and saying use it. So that is why it's becoming the weapon of choice in a sense here. So many things could be done to stop that, which I don't see happening.
Go ahead, Bobby.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
Well, I think there's a much simpler answer. The reason why the tech companies have not been able to stop this sort of thing happening is because they don't care to. They're not doing anywhere near enough. Yeah. It's not enough to say we are putting thousands of people on the job.
Right.
If you're putting thousands of people and you're not getting it done, then it's time to put 10,000 of people. These companies make billions of dollars in profits. They ought to be able to do this.
Go ahead, Hima.
So let me give you some examples here. For example, when there is a live stream that has something horrible, a lot of people are going to see it. So put in what are called, I call anomalous triggers. There's a number of people are going up really fast. The velocity is quick. Their reactions are quick. Even the complaints might be happening quickly. Put that at the top of the list and review it. Or stop that stream until it gets reviewed, or just hide it, what I call the bozo button, to make sure nobody else is seeing it. The person thinks it's still going out there, but at least get a reviewer to see it. Or in terms of spreading around the world, I'm actually pretty shocked that this is happening even today in 2019, if it is fingerprinted, something that's been around for years now that copyright industry uses, all sorts of companies are using it. Fingerprint the sound if you don't want to fingerprint the video, and share that fingerprint with everybody else so they can use it and block it from happening. Or, for example, use AI to Listen to the sound. There are sounds of children crying, people screaming, gunshots happening. When you see that, take a look and say, hey, there's something unusual about this video that needs examination, especially in a live environment. You can't claim it's a movie.
Phil, let me ask you, these websites, they're obviously places where these horrific bigots go to vent and then sometimes to plot. Law enforcement presumably knows about them. Are they using them enough?
Look, I think this is about chapter 2 of a 20-chapter book. When I was at the Bureau, they're using them, they're looking at them. But there's a difference between somebody talking about hate. In this country, we say hate's okay, and somebody talking about violence. My first question in this case is not just what happened. It's when they were talking online, were there other people involved in this who should have alerted law enforcement? It's not just people like Facebook. It's also a citizen who sees this and says, I heard this guy talking. I didn't say anything. I want to hear about those people.
Jake, this is where the grassroots come in, right? The government can't do everything, and technologies have a very big role to play, and Bobby is absolutely right that they haven't done enough. But the people that are actually able to build resilience in communities to fight all kinds of us versus them are NGOs themselves and communities themselves. Tech companies should be partnering with those NGOs to do more. We have already tested the kinds of things that work to help people along the way as they become more and more radicalized. Why haven't we scaled them? That's the question we should be asking.